82% of team members feel misunderstood or undervalued. So this is exactly where I like to be, teaching, communicating, helping others, realizing their aspirations. I'm so excited about shattering the glittering image and uncovering the truth about you.
Welcome back to the Intrepid Impact Leadership Show. I'm Jerry Howard here, your host, your executive performance coach, and your certified jail inspector. And if you're just tuning in for the first time and you don't know what that means, check out our previous episodes because you're going to get all the details about that and find out exactly what it takes to get certified to inspect jails. But we here at the Intrepid Impact Leadership Show, we sit at the intersection of faith, leadership, and business. And to us, those are as inseparable as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I have a guest today named Dan Heneghan, who to me epitomizes that very nuance. Faith, leadership, and business. And Dan, it's so great to have you here with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jerry. I think I fooled you.
No. Well, Dan, we've talked a little bit at lunch not too long ago, and I learned that you had, what I would call truly a serial entrepreneur, and now into, managing the area for the C12 program. Is that correct?
That's true. We're launching C12, which many years ago was Christian 12, but now it's C12 Forums, and they haven't been in Richmond ever. So have the opportunity to launch the practice here in town.
That's great. Well, being that we're faith, leadership, and business here, I'd love for the viewers to just get a little bit of your background, understand kind of where you got involved in business, how that manifested, and what brought you here.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jerry. Yeah, the background for me was getting out of Carolina in '79. Interest rates were really high. Thought, hey, let's get into some business on your own. Kind of hard at that time.
Sure.
But the good news is that when Reagan came in to be elected, he started focusing on qualified plans and having really retirement plan to become something called 401ks. And so at the time I was working with a insurance company on the group side, and it was a wonderful opportunity to network with people. At this time, I was in the Baltimore, Washington area, which is where I grew up, and meeting people, meeting businesses, and having conversations about how employees could participate in their own retirement planning I got bit by the bug of being with small businesses and the diversity of just having conversations with people. So that was kind of the start of saying, I like this idea of being able to sort of work for yourself, even though I was with a carrier at the time. Most importantly, the practice that I had was really kind of just go out and do the work and build your practice.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. And from there, and I think we've talked too about some of the businesses you started. It seemed like you became more of an entrepreneur and starting more business later on. I'd love to hear about that too.
Yeah, there was, again, at the time, of course, I didn't recognize that the Lord had a plan. I didn't have saving faith. I sort of thought I had faith, but that wasn't the truth. But there were different people that came into my life at different times that gave me opportunities. And so that the idea of taking a risk, when I was single, I was single through my late 20s, early 30s. The idea of taking a risk was just, okay, it's about me taking the risk. So that was an easier thing to consider. And then then I got married and recognizing now I'm providing for a family, it's a little bit more of a calculated risk.
Yeah.
But at the time, that whole idea of that you have a blank sheet of paper and you're looking at let's say a potential business problem and saying, how do we address that problem? And so rather than getting color by numbers, you sort of start filling in that sheet of paper. And I think it's a function of having people around you that can support that. So the healthcare market was a market that I had sort of gravitated towards. And so the healthcare startups that I was involved in were predominantly in the healthcare industry. Mm-hmm. And as many people know from just the U.S. healthcare delivery, there's a lot of change. And when there's change, there's always an opportunity to be creative and to try to fill a gap. So again, I think that the threads that the Lord had of who I met and opportunities that I took, I was blessed in many ways, even though I wasn't quick to give him, let's say, the glory for the blessing early on.
Don't I hear you? Yeah, and I think that we as individuals, as leaders, have to be intentional about that. And one of the things we teach here, both with the giant tools that I mentioned earlier, as well as on the YouTube channel, is intentional versus accidental leadership. And it sounds like you hit the nail on the head there. And if you don't have the attitude of gratitude, I would say, then that intentionality and giving the Lord credit is way harder. And I love hearing that you understand that you were blessed in that regard too. And in fact, your healthcare background is actually what piqued my interest too, because when I was running the post-acute rehab centers, we converted a number of them from paper records to electronic records, and that conversion was very time consuming, but the quality of the system we were using always determined how hard or easy it was to manage.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the delivery system has a classic demand and supply problem in that more and more, let's say even the baby boomers, they're going to demand healthcare delivery the way they are getting things like Amazon delivery. There's a lot of, let's call it, contemporary experiences that we compare to the healthcare delivery system. And we know there's big demand, but there's not a lot of supply of providers. And so to that end, things like telehealth, the opportunities to do self-care, there's more and more of that because we know there's a shortage of nurses, we know there's a shortage of doctors, and yet people are still actively looking for care. I think today's, one of the news feeds today said just the state of Virginia is really struggling with how do you support behavioral health care for the citizens of the state. It's a challenge, but there's a big need for it, especially on the heels of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something, the shortages in both doctors, nurses, practitioners of all kinds, was a nuance that we were struggling with before COVID, or before I even became or went into business ownership myself, which was only compounded by COVID. In fact, I couldn't imagine what some of those hospitals and doctors and nurses are going through now.
Right. Well, again, when things like that happen, and I do believe that those are opportunities to see creativity. People that come out of that. I mean, you look at what happened to the real estate market. People decided to leave the cities and go to rural areas. I mean, the amount of development that occurred in a number of states where people started moving to their second homes. Well, now people are comfortable doing telecommuting, and so now those second home communities they're experiencing sort of demand for, well, we need to provide services and support for these people who've just come here, because they're expecting sort of the same things that they had in the city in terms of access to services. And so, I mean, just my wife and I just moved to Irvington, Virginia, and something as simple as the hours of operation, it's a rural area and it's like 10 to 2. And you kind of go, okay, you're in a retail business and you're only open for 4 hours. I mean, but that's sort of what the experience is. And so there will be a business that'll be open till 5, and then they'll probably start to get more business than the people that close at 2. So change is in my mind, is a great sort of catalyst, for how do we adapt to that?
I like that you said that. And I'm curious too, what kind of implementations or strategies do you see the healthcare field taking on in the future with some of those challenges?
Well, I think that part of it, and I think this is where we all have very different, let's say, physical profiles, mental profiles, and I think that certainly the movement towards things like artificial intelligence, I do think that, as one of my partners at one of the companies who was a physician said, he said, Dan, pretty soon you'll just take a swab inside your cheek and you'll send that to a lab, and the medicines that'll be specific to your DNA will be delivered to you.
Wow.
So the whole idea of, let's call it mass customization, I think that people, they get on medications, they try to figure out, is this working or not? And so I do think that in the future, which is still the present now, I mean, you think of some of the chemotherapies that are now delivering, not only taking care of the patient, but they're also prolonging life, because these chemotherapies are geared very much to a person's, how do they metabolize things. So I think that the future is definitely going to be much more one-to-one, rather than mass. But the question is, how are we going to pay for that? And that's that's the tension of developing things like that. It's going to take money, and if those people that are developing those therapies don't have a chance to make a profit, then how does that work? And so I think that's going to be a challenge to sort that out. Yeah,
that's interesting too. And we kind of touched on the entrepreneurial background you have, and I know we're going to talk about C12, but I want to hear, or I want the viewers really to hear, what are you personally, Dan, most passionate about?
Well, I think certainly as we get older, and if there are circumstances that, at least from my perspective, or I came to faith later in life, I would say that the things that I'm passionate about equal how is it that when we look at the lens of our interaction with people or our interactions in business, how is it we look at it in a way that gives God the glory?
Yeah.
And I think that the challenge is that we're flesh, we're selfish, we have pride, and I know full well the experience of thinking when you accomplish something, well, that was all about what I did. Well, sort of graduating, or let's say evolving from that perspective, requires a change of heart. And so what I'm passionate about is seeing the local churches be discerning about how is it that they can get into the community and really do three things. How do they love God? How do they love each other, neighbors? And how do they make disciples?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I'm passionate about how is it we can connect in ways that allow the church to be among us, not a building or us all hanging in the huddle, all talking about, well, this is what our church does. Well, how is it that we live in a community that doesn't have people that maybe they know the Lord, but what he asks us to do is just to go out and sow seeds. And so I'd say that be it in churches or even in business, how can we sow the seeds of really the truth of the gospel in a way that is loving, not wagging our finger or judging, but just being present to people and being empathetic, remembering their name, something simple. Those are the type of things I think are I'm passionate about that, which is sort of, it's not about entertaining myself or finding ways to be satisfied by doing something as much as just by being present.
That's so important, and I've heard it said before too that I'm trying to remember where, but to evangelize, I think effectively. And I have a friend, his name's Mark Thomas. He has a podcast called Evangelism on Fire. If you haven't checked that out, Evangelism on Fire is a podcast. It's amazing. You're going to love it. But one of the things he focuses on, not only in the podcast, and I know him personally, he's a very close friend. He does this in his personal life too. When he evangelizes, he always makes a friend first. And I'm thinking about what you said about being passionate about loving God, loving others, and then making disciples. And the loving others piece really comes down to, I think like you said, getting out of your own, letting that ego go and just being okay with you, and that person can be okay with them, and really forming that relationship.
Oh, without a doubt. We've had a couple of our daughters have been involved with different sorts of ministries, one of which was in Young Life. And Young Life would describe their overall goal is you sort of earn the right to be heard. And earning the right when you are spending time, in this case, my daughter Lauren was at George Mason in college ministries. And she said, Dad, college kids, they love to go to Target. So you just go pick them up. You take them to Target because they're going to buy things, and you're sitting in the car with them, and you have a chance to visit with them. Wow. But the fact that you're just picking them up, and she said one point she thought, it costs money to go get haircuts. I'll just try to figure out how to cut hair. And then I'll have somebody sitting in a chair, and I'll be giving her a free haircut because she's, on a certain dorm room or dorm floor, and I'll have a chance to get to know her. So the idea of just that being present and then caring for somebody else, most people are too busy, let's say, with their own self to not really say, I need to give. And then, as the Lord would say, it's amazing when you give what you get back.
I couldn't agree more. I think that, I have my own insecurities about whatever, but I found that once you're in that giving mode, once you forget about all your crap, whatever it may be, excuse my language, then you become so much more of I would say a leader worth following is what we like to say here a lot. And that's why I love speaking to business owners about faith. I feel like the nation's largest mission field is the workplace, the marketplace, as the church likes to call it. And if we can raise up leaders that are discipling others within the marketplace, then we can truly make a change, because you don't have to be at the water cooler wagging your finger, as you said. You just need to make a friend, because at some point they're going to know if your actions line up with your words when it comes to your faith, somebody's going to ask you about your faith when they have that challenge. But if you become that friend that they can rely upon, just like I believe you said your daughter was cutting hair and taking people to Target, that's so simple yet so brilliant at the same time.
I think that there's this connecting Sunday to Monday, and there's a lot of in the culture that we live in, everyone says, well, how can you be so arrogant about yours is the only way, and you're supposed to keep your work life and supposedly your faith life in silos. So there's all of the, I would call them the lies that we deal with, but that connecting between Sunday and Monday, it would be like, here's who you are, and then let's check in who you are at the door before you start working. And I just don't see that as really the right approach. And most importantly is if you're greeting people in your office, if you're hiring, if you're running the administration or the economics of your business in a way that's transparent and open, and certainly you're not cheating on your taxes or you're trying to do this, then the business reflects the image of God. And I think that's, he said, we made man in our image. So we are to be reflecting him. And reflecting him says that there's a way to do things that reflects really his love for us because he made us. But, this idea that somehow we evolved from some primates, well, I do think the creative juices that we have to run a business and to build things, haven't seen too many of the orangutans, making things like
right.
smartphones or whatever. So in each of us, there's that divinity of his image. And I think in a business, most importantly, having people around you that you can talk about, I think that's key. And that's one of the reasons why I got involved with C12 on my last startup, is that I really felt like it's important to have people around the table that can sort of answer your questions, but then most importantly, question your answers. Because sometimes you'll get an answer and your reference point is what I know. But if you have peers around you, all of a sudden there's this multiplier effect of other people's experiences, and that really starts to give you some context and better perspective. So I think that there's a real important step, I think, to being humble enough to say, I need to learn more and I want to surround myself with people that can help me. And as you know, what you're doing right now is you're identifying ways for people to give God the glory in the work that they do.
Yeah.
And that's the most we can do, I think.
I agree 100%. And you mentioned the workplace and having those peers around you too. I think it's a great segue into kind of learning more about C12 in particular. And I know the viewers would be highly interested in that as well.
Great. Well, thanks, Jerry. The C12 has been around for 30 years, and there's probably close to 40 states in the U.S. that currently chairs, which is what my role is. We facilitate a once-a-month forum where anywhere between 8 to 10 and 12 to 14 CEOs, business owners, will be around the table, and they'll spend a day together, and there will be curated business content that will take up a couple hours of the day. There'll be at least an hour of a very specific Bible verse, and what is it about that verse that we can look at in the context of how we are running our businesses, how we are running our personal life. And then the last part of the day is around open forum issues, be it each business once a year does a complete 360 view of their business, balance sheet, income statement, strategic plan, all of which is confidential, stays inside that meeting. And then once a month, during the month, each of the CEOs then has about an hour, hour and a half with the chair, just to talk about one-on-one things, be it some things they learned during the forum that month that they are questioning, hey, how do I apply this? Or I need some resource help for that. Or it may really have nothing to do with business. It could be that there's a distraction in their family because somebody maybe has just gone to college and that college student's having some challenges. And this person may want to talk about, hey, you've had a couple kids go to college. Tell me a little bit about how you handled that. So I think that the forum opportunity is, 3,500 CEOs nationally. It's growing. And I think what's important is that there's an overall impact when you have more of these groups in one market. Then all of a sudden the tide is rising on people that are experiencing what's it like to have your business really operate as a ministry. Not just make money and write a check to a ministry, which certainly that's a wonderful thing, but how is it that everything you do in your business is a ministry, from how you hire. I mean, this month, it's all about executive and employee compensation. Well, we're taking the best analysis of Bain and McKinsey, and we're cherry picking that and curating that so that people get a sense for what are current compensation formulas, especially in a world where people are maybe working virtually. Yeah. So if you now have a labor pool where there's more jobs chasing fewer people, then how is it you construct your compensation formula? So that's just an example of what the February content's going to be. So I was part of a group for 2 years, absolutely loved it. It was like pure protein for the day.
Oh, that's great.
And of course, I had a smaller business, so coming back and saying, what can I actually make happen from what I've learned, was a little bit constrained because I didn't have dozens of employees to say, hey, we want to tackle this, and I could delegate that.
Yeah.
So it's a little harder on let's say the business that's less than $5 million in revenue, a little bit harder, but I'd say the business profiles are anywhere between, maybe $1 million, $2 million in sales on up to really tens of millions of dollars are the types of folks that are around the table.
That's a great, I would say, cross-section of it, too. And I love that you were involved ahead of time and loved it. With C12 in particular, what kind of transformations do you see within there, or maybe stories you've heard? Or
well, the stories it's amazing. I mean, I think story is such a good word because everybody has a different story, and it's something that's memorable. I mean, we know that Christ, when he spoke in parables, those were stories that, for those that believed, he said, you'll have ears to hear this. But I'm deliberately challenging the people that don't know me, and they're not going to understand these parables. So that story approach, I would say as many people around the table are as many different stories. One of the chairs that supports probably 2 or 3 different CEO groups down in North Carolina said, Dan, one day I had a guest who came to the meeting, and the guest said, well, tell me, what is it that C12 has done for you? And he asked the members around the table. And one of the members said, well, I don't know if C12 is for you, but let me tell you, my marriage got better. My relationships with my kids got better. My business got better. And we made more money. So those are the things that work for me. But most importantly, my relationship with the Lord, it was like never been better.
Yeah.
But maybe that's my experience. And so when you hear that, a number of different things that have favorably impacted a person. And I think that the C12 does a wonderful job of at least putting some testimonies out there, so first-person narratives of those people who are part of a table. What is it that they've done? What have they experienced? What were the challenges of actually deciding to be part of a C12 group, and how did they work through that? So I have a great deal of respect for the CEO of C12, and that I think that the effort to stay on mission and to be completely clear about what the goals are, we're not trying to bend the message. Really, we're sowers. The seed, the parable of the soils, the sower just throws the seed out there. There's no description of the sower or what his technique was or her technique. Lots of conversation about the soils. So, the idea of changing the message to make it more attractive, no. What we know is we'll talk to 10 to 20 people. Maybe 1 or 2 people will say, I really feel called to do that. Well, that's exactly who belongs to the table, the person who's called.
Absolutely. That's so good. I'll mention Mark Thomas again with that podcast because he told me this a number of years ago now, and this was true in my case because not unlike you, I came to the Lord at a later age, didn't grow up in the church, but he said that people that come to know the Lord typically hear the word 6 to 7 times before they accept it. And I almost felt like those were pieces of the puzzle for me personally in my life that not fertilize the soil, but change the soil, as you said, because the seed never changed. It's just that particular time that I heard it.
Right.
The soil was fertile, and of course, 30, 60, 90, 100-fold return on that. And
and that's an example of during our C12 meetings. When we start the day, we do a balance wheel where we talk about how in balance, is your life. Where are you on biblical community? Where are you in discipleship? Where are you at, rest and relaxation? Where are you with your family? I mean, these are questions that, normally aren't being asked of the CEO out of the gates, but to be transparent about that. And then when we move into our first devotion, it's just incredible how the Holy Spirit will work. And we will all read the same passage, and then the chair will say, well, tell me, Jerry, what is it about that particular passage that speaks to you given the things you're doing in your business with an Intrepid Impact? Well, you'll draw something out of that passage that the Spirit has for you, and that'll be different than what he has for somebody else. And so that is very much like the Word, in that if you're in it, it can be convicting every day. In fact, I've looked back on some devotions that I've read through Charles Spurgeon's Morning and Evening, and I will underline things that, let's say, I read on February 6th of 22. And looking at it again today, I go, well, that's interesting, because the bottom paragraph is there's something about that now, not what I underlined last year. So I think that power of having those different experiences around the table certainly is that's a key ingredient. It's about the table. It's not about the chair.
That's right.
You're just facilitating the conversation.
That's good, and it's fascinating too, because it sounds like you hit. And we try to do this here, of course, with the consulting I do as well. But you hit in the qualitative with the faith, and then the personal relationships that you mentioned. But then you said the business is getting better, so we've got the qualitative and the quantitative wrapped into a nice, it sounds like a monthly experience for all these participants.
It is. I mean, the question we normally ask is, are you in a place where you can work on your business, not just work in your business? And we all know that we're always fighting fires. Any startup phase or any business that's growing, there's always more you can probably do. Okay, but to be able to step back, first of all, I think it signals, can you get out of your business first? Can you actually remove it from being in it for a day and allow the people that you've hired to surround you and execute? Is there a crisis that you can't do that? Well, how's that working for you? You know what I mean? Yeah. Maybe that's actually something you need to think about. But if somebody does take the time to move away from their business for a day, usually that clarity and kind of cleaning out the pipes, but not just going and sitting on a beach with a drink with an umbrella in it, but actually being around some other people and having some questions that you might have answered by somebody that they may be a concrete, contractor, and yet they may have insights on a problem that you're having that, if you're a software developer, you'd say, well, how is it that we're going to have that much in common? Well, both of you are making payroll, trying to identify how to get new business, how to take care of customers, how to deal with cybersecurity. I mean, things like that are not just specific to a type of an industry. So I think that there's a lot to apply, but it's usually the big question is time. How much time do people have to do that? And are they involved in other peer groups, which is absolutely a very good thing? Or is this a peer group that brings God into the picture in a way? Because bottom line is, if he has a plan for our life as believers, why wouldn't he have a plan for our business?
Absolutely.
So if he has a plan for our business, shouldn't we be in touch with that?
I love that, because what I've seen with my daughter, as I mentioned before, and myself as well, when you're walking that path that God prefers for you, things tend to go better. It doesn't mean you're not going to walk through a valley or two, a dark valley, but I found that grace is so much easier to perceive and feel. So it stands to reason that if you're in business, then that's probably part of God's plan for you. And with that said, how did you make the transition from being in business for yourself or facilitating, I guess, the C12?
Well, again, having experienced it for 2 years as a member of the table, we were building a business in actually that had investors in Nashville, and as that business was growing, it was pretty clear that in order to take the business to the next level, it was going to need additional capital, and to that end, it was also going to require, let's call it much more, intense focus on the business. And I really felt like there was sort of a mutual agreement that it was probably best to have a CEO take over that would take it to that next level. And, I guess in all humility, sometimes having a sense that the next step is actually better for somebody else rather than for me. I mean, I think there's parts of that might be a challenge, but on the other hand, if I do believe I go nowhere by accident, then the Lord had a very specific plan in that, which is that I still have shares in that company. I'm still rooting for that company to continue to grow. but I think it gave my wife and I a season to be able to just spend time with each other. Probably over the last 5 years, she had buried her mom, her brother, and her dad. And so all along that time, I'm doing startup stuff. So that disconnect of chasing the business versus necessarily being present, that I think that there was just that general sense when her dad passed this December that the time was right for us to take time together, which we thoroughly enjoyed. And then on the heels of that, C12 had said, hey, what are your next steps? And I said, I really don't know, but for some reason I'm curious about what is it to be a C12 chair? And they said, well, as a matter of fact, we are looking for chairs to be in a couple different markets. And so I think that, again, just praying about it, and all of a sudden that bubbled up. And then for them to say, the Richmond market is a startup, but that means you'll have to move from Wilmington, North Carolina. And my wife said, I think it's time for us to maybe move and to do that. So that was somewhat of a surprise. But on the other hand, I think, again, the Lord was working on that.
Oh, well, God certainly loves unity, especially in the marriage. So that's fantastic. And if you're listening or watching in, if you don't have agreement inside the home, maybe pray a little bit more before you make that decision. Absolutely. So I love for that. That's a great example of that, because that's so key. I know it's been that way in my own home as well. So, Dan, I've loved having you on the show today, hearing about C12. Do you have any parting words for the viewers?
Oh, no, I'm just thrilled that the platform that you're choosing now to focus on different people and either their challenges or what their journey is. We know that there's a lot of, let's say, shouting at each other and divisive sort of conversations out there, and any effort to seed the market with stories that give people the opportunity to say, I can love the Lord and be in his presence, and I can enjoy eternal life now, which is to walk with him and to really walk under his sovereignty. And you're living that, and you're taking your own sort of risk in starting this program. So I'm just delighted. I'm just be praying for you and your team here that you continue to have, let's say, many, many more guests that enjoy the conversation with you.
That's very generous of you to say, and it's been my pleasure. In fact, how we met was me just talking about the show with, if I believe it was Peter Larson.
Oh, sure.
That made that introduction. So you're absolutely right. And it gets me around folks that are on that same mission of faith, leadership, and business. So, Dan, thanks for the kind words.
Yeah,
thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it's
been a pleasure.
It really has.
Folks, this has been another episode of the Intrepid Impact Leadership channel here on YouTube. So glad that you joined us. Keep looking out for us, and we'll see you next time.
82% of team members feel misunderstood or undervalued. So this is exactly where I like to be, teaching, communicating, helping others, realizing their aspirations. I'm so excited about shattering the glittering image and uncovering the truth about you.